We got one more guest, one more segment here for this Wednesday edition of the show. That is with Wes Reynolds, at Wes Reynolds, the number one on Twitter, regular contributor to VSIN and the Point Spread Weekly newsletter. Wes, how's it going today, man?
Going well, Adam. How about yourself, sir?
Doing very well, buddy. Appreciate your time as always here, man. And I know that you were on the air on Monday night with the opportunity to talk about the horrific crash with Ryan Newman. And you and I were just talking before we started recording here that there's actually a picture on Twitter today of Ryan Newman standing up, smiling with his two girls. I cannot remember a more horrifying incident than that one, and I cannot remember being so relieved that a stranger was okay.
Yeah, exactly, because the race had gotten over before we went to do the show, and probably about a 45-minute window there or so, or half hour. And Fox on the broadcast didn't have a lot of information. They didn't give anything out, and they weren't really showing a lot of angles of the crash, and they weren't staying with the coverage. So you obviously gravitated toward thinking the worst. And I personally had that eerie feeling, and I've been following motorsports in all areas my whole life. And when something bad happens, and I just thought, this is reminding me of 2001 when Dale Earnhardt was killed at the Daytona 500. And I didn't want to say that on the air because obviously we want to be responsible and we don't want to speculate on what's happening. So we're basically giving updates that, hey, we don't have any information. And then NASCAR and Steve O'Donnell, the executives, called a press conference and gave, of course, the good news that it was serious but not life-threatening injuries, which is the biggest relief because, we're a sport betting network, so we had to update, okay, who won the race and what the top 5 or 10 finishes were and what Danny Hamlin was in terms of a price. 10-1 is the winner, but you can't bury the lead. You get to the point where you do have to be a sport network too, and you have to discuss what has actually happened here, and obviously balance that, showing the proper sensitivity and compassion in terms of that, in terms of what has happened, because whether you're a race fan or not, we're human beings, and nobody roots, even though danger is a part of that, is a part of motorsports. It's a part of it, and it's part of the attraction. But deep down, I don't think anybody wants to see a fatality. And I thought, look, you're not saying it, but you're thinking it, like, okay, something bad has happened here. And I thought Ryan Newman was killed, but thankfully he's not. And seeing that picture with him that I just saw a few minutes ago, with him standing with his two daughters, because he had gone through some adversity too, because he and his wife of 16 years, like a few days before the race, announced their separation. So it's like, wow, this is just to have all of this happen. So I'm glad for him and his family, and I'm glad for the sport that they're not having to explain a fatality from that dangerous restrictor plate racing that they do at Daytona.
Yeah, and I mentioned this in my preview this morning over at BangTheBook.com for this weekend's Pennzoil 400 that, look, I mean, Vegas, a 1.5-mile track. It's probably not going to be the most exciting race. Probably not a whole lot of lead changes coming in this one. But you know what? I don't think that's a bad thing for the sport or the drivers to just kind of have a follow the leader type of thing this weekend.
Right. And look, Las Vegas Motor Speedway had this many years ago when IndyCar was racing out there. And obviously on a high bank track like that, IndyCar, it is a way different setup, and cars were getting airborne. And unfortunately, I remember, and it reminded me, this Newman crash kind of took me back to Dan Weldon here at the Las Vegas Motor Speedway when he was tragically killed. And just when you're not getting that news, and it's like, that the broadcasters that are bringing you the coverage on television or radio, that they know something, but they can't say anything, because obviously this is something you have to triple, quadruple, quintuple confirm before you report something like that, and then being wrong. So it's that old don't be first, be right.
Well, we'll move to something more lighthearted here, and that's the XFL, where it's week 3. We got 4 more games coming up, 2 on Saturday, 2 on Sunday, and games are now 6-2 to the under. We kind of expected some more offense, some more points with the different conversion opportunities, some of the different rules, the clock structure, all that. But so far, all we've had, I think, in my estimation, is a bad product. A lot of inefficient offenses. We've had a couple of good games here and there. We've had some players put up some very impressive numbers, but by and large, I mean, the ratings were down last week. Attendance was up, though. Obviously, betting interest is still pretty high in this thing, but so far, it's just it's not a real great product, and I think it's still very difficult to bet on.
Yeah, I mean, it's had its hits and its misses. I think the production in terms of as a television product has been very good. I like the transparency in terms of when you have a booth review that you're actually hearing the conversation between the replay official and the actual official on the field. I think that's good. I think that keeps the interest because, look, how many NFL games or even college games do we watch where they show the replay numerous amount of times and they're filling time? And, these reviews can often take forever. Whereas, at least with the XFL, you get taken through the process. So it keeps you engaged in what you just saw. But, the football, I think, has been hit or miss. The Sunday games ended up being very competitive for week 2. The second game, which was St. Louis and Houston, a decent lead-in if you watch the NBA All-Star game. The second game was very competitive and ended up 28-25 Houston. So at least a game where the outcome was kind of in the balance. So I think by and large it was a little bit better in terms of a product in week 2 than it was in week 1. But like to your point, look, some of the quarterback play has not been great. We did for one of our XFL betcasts, we did that New York DC game, and Matt McGloin getting benched. Really, the only storyline was the fact that he basically threw the entire New York Guardians brain trust under the bus, and then not one but 2 interviews with ESPN sideline reporter Diana Rossini. So that was like the only intrigue of the game because New York was obviously dreadful in that game, and they're getting bet against accordingly.
All right, so we take a look at this round of games here coming up. We got the Houston Roughnecks laying 6.5 on the road at the Tampa Bay Vipers. And the Vipers, a lot of people liked this team coming into the XFL season. They were believers in Mark Trestman, his familiarity with the CFL and some of the CFL type concepts and characteristics here of this league. But they've scored 1 offensive touchdown. Have they scored an offensive touchdown so far?
The Vipers, I believe they've scored 1.
Yeah, it's been a mess. I mean, maybe this scheme is just a little bit too hard for them to figure out, but it has really not been a particularly good look for them thus far.
No, and I think they've been a little bit of the surprise in a bad way because Mark Trestman won 3 Grey Cups in the CFL. So this is a guy that has won. I know it didn't really work out for him with the Chicago Bears, and these teams are looking like his Bears years rather than his CFL years. But with Tampa Bay, Aaron Murray did not play well week 1, 2 red zone turnovers. And then they went with Taylor Cornelius by and large last week, a kid out of Oklahoma State, whereas you kind of figured, okay, they're going to go with Quentin Flowers because he's more of a run-pass option guy, and I think this league probably is more conducive to having a run-pass option type of quarterback, somebody who can scramble. I mean, look, Cardell Jones, not really known as a runner, but was able to make some plays with his legs and continue drives, especially early in the game. And that's so important because it helped him get off to a good start where DC eventually put away New York. But to the Houston side, Houston has been the top offense in the league. They scored 28 last week, 37 in week 1. You weren't sure really if that Houston offense from week 1, if that was because of the LA defense or if that was a product just of the LA defense. But turns out it's probably a little bit of both. Houston and PJ Walker, who spent 3 years with the Colts, have done very well. June Jones is the coach down there and runs a little bit of that old run and shoot look. So Houston, I think definitely, and it's not just because of the record, they're the team that has looked the best to me.
Yeah, I'm kind of torn on this one. I think I like the under a little bit, now down to 45. It was 45.5 when I wrote this up last night over at bangthebook.com. But for Houston last week, they had two very, very short touchdown drives in St. Louis territory. So the BattleHawks very easily could have won that game. And we're kind of getting to the point now. We do only have 2 data points, but some of that overreaction is probably going to start setting in here a little bit. The Vipers, in week 1, they moved the football quite a bit. They didn't really move the football overly well last week, but they did move the football in week 1. They just, as you mentioned, Aaron Murray had the 2 red zone turnovers. They've squandered a lot of their scoring opportunities. I feel like maybe 6.5 is a little bit big in this game, but, obviously the Vipers need to find a way to start cashing in some of their chances too.
Yeah, and you mentioned in terms of the under, all 4 games have been bet under from the openers, where you're getting a lower number now than you would have been when these pretty much, excuse me, opened up market wide at what you would our full limits at the time. Eventually, I think that you're going to see regression more to the higher scoring games, not necessarily just across the board, but the totals probably now in the mid 40s by and large are where they should be. I think when they were 40.5, they were obviously too low because they all got crushed to the over. And then once they got into the 50s, those were way too high. So now seeing them in the mid 40s, I think at least on an aggregate or an average, are really the right way to go. Eventually, you're going to see buy points on the over, I think, because the league, with the rules, they're doing everything that they can to promote scoring. So maybe as these teams get more timing and get more reps, you're going to see higher scoring. But I'd be with you on Tampa Bay. I'm seeing a 7 at Caesars, and look, 7 might not be with the extra point differentials and kind of some of the oddball scores. 7 might not be the key number that we would think in the NFL as it is in the NFL or even somewhat in college football. But this getting to 7, and it actually proved to kind of work out that way last week when Dallas and LA, because LA, you remember, went for 3 down 19-15 and converted. And it was 19-18. Dallas gets a touchdown, does not convert the PAT, so it lands 7. So if you waited on the 7 with LA, you at least got a push last week.
Speaking of Dallas here, they go out on the road to Seattle. They're a 5-point favorite in that game, total 43.5. And look, 6.7 yards per play last week for Dallas with Landry Jones at the helm. Did throw a couple of interceptions. Dallas had 103 yards in penalties, 3 turnovers total. So a lot of things that Dallas does need to clean up, but they've got Landry Jones now, and they take on a Seattle Dragons team that, look, last week Brandon Silvers wasn't very good, 7 of 18 for 91 yards. 68 of those yards came on one play. Outside of the 68-yard play, 130 yards on the other 50 plays. I mean, is this game just poorly lined with Dallas only laying 5?
It's probably right in the middle of where it should be. Big, and you're right about Tampa Bay in Seattle. Tampa Bay had 3 turnovers last week, and that's basically what New York did in week 1, is taking advantage of Tampa Bay's turnovers, and Seattle did the same thing, same song, different verse in week 2. With Dallas, you look at those numbers that Jones put up, and obviously a lot more in the passing game, but what really helped Dallas, because that's the game we did on Sunday for the BetCast, Dallas at LA, what really helped Dallas is getting that running game going. And they had Cameron Artis-Payne, who used to play at Auburn, Lance Dunbar, former Dallas Cowboy. They were doing these like quick hitter kind of half play action handoffs over the middle, and they started to gash LA. Now, I don't know if that was just LA's defense getting tired or what it was, but they weren't able to run side to side on these teams. But they were able to get it up the middle, those little draws, those little quick hitters, and be able to break those for some big runs. So if Dallas can do that, and that's basically what I've noticed in this XFL, at least so far through 2 weeks, teams that can at least keep the defenses honest in terms of running the ball. Not that they're putting up huge statistical numbers, but teams that can run the ball are the teams that win in this league.
Yeah, and as we look here, the Dragons in 2 games, 6 of 25 on third down. And last week, I know the Vipers struggled to score once again, as they have in both of their games, but they were 9 for 17 on third down in that game against the Dragons. So if Seattle can't stay on the field and can't get off the field, I think Dallas is ripe for a blowout victory here.
Yeah, and Dallas had that disappointing week 1 when they didn't have Jones in the lineup. And I think probably, too, wasn't just the quarterback play. Hal Money and Bob Stoops, in terms of the play calling, were a little bit conservative, probably because they didn't have Jones in there. And then St. Louis really ran the ball very well. They're the best in the league at running the football. And I think probably threw Dallas off. But Dallas was listed as the pre-flop favorite on the futures market to win the XFL championship. Yeah, I do think that they're a better team. And Seattle had a good crowd on Saturday. So I was amused at some of the XFL content that was out there last week in terms of the previews. It's like, Seattle's got the best home field advantage in the league. Well, how do you know? They haven't played a game yet. So you're assuming, based on the data that we have from the Seattle Seahawks, that they have one of the best home field advantage in the NFL. And actually, Seattle at home wasn't that good, because now that's priced into the number because their home field advantage has been so good for many years. But yeah, I mean, probably you're still getting it priced into the market in terms of the Seattle home field. So this line, you could argue, probably should be 6.
I gotta say, I mean, I think the Beer Snake in DC, I think DC's got the best home field advantage. I don't know if you saw that.
I do too.
Incredible.
I do too. And their fans were passionate. It's a smaller stadium, because it's interesting. Like, half of these XFL stadiums are soccer stadiums, which is really where they should be playing these games based on the attendance that they're going to get and to make them look more full. And then half of them are either dome stadiums or regular football stadiums. But DC at Audi Field, that's only a little over 20,000 seats. And those are probably the crowds that they're going to draw for a lot of these games. You're drawing in the 20 to 25,000. Those are good crowds for out of season, if you want to call it football, an alternative football league. To get the crowds MLS would get at some of these games, I would think that that's the goal for the XFL in that regard.
So we moved to Sunday here, and, there were a lot of questions about the BattleHawks coming into the season, but St. Louis could very well be 2-0. I mean, if they don't have some turnover issues last week and lose the field position battle so badly against Houston, they would be 2-0. They were 0 for 4 on their extra point tries in that game as well. But this team with Jordan Ta'amu at the helm, 50 first downs. He's probably been the best player in this league, although some would say Cardale Jones. They're now a 10-point favorite against the New York Guardians with a total of only 40.5 here for Sunday's first game.
Yeah, who'd have thunked that? Because this team was dead last on the odds board, because a lot of these other guys, or at least most of them, have had some kind of head coaching experience. And Jonathan Hayes, the former Kansas City Chief tight end, has not. He coached at Oklahoma, was the special teams and the tight ends coach. He was with Marvin Lewis at Cincinnati for 15 years as the tight end coach. So here's a guy that not only never really got an opportunity or was never even close to getting consideration for a head coach, but he was never even a coordinator or an assistant head coach. So there was a lot of unknowns around Jonathan Hayes in St. Louis, and that's why I think all the books put them as the longest shot on the board to win this league. But they've been a lot better than I think people have thought, because they can run the ball. And they led the league. That's what they did against Dallas. They basically ran the ball. And Jordan Ta'amu, very short passing game, not taking a lot of bombs down the field, but very efficient. Now, last week they ran the ball 43 times for 126 yards. That's 2.9 yards a carry. So that's not very impressive statistically, but it's effective because it keeps you on the field. It keeps you in the game. They actually outgained Houston by a ton last week. They actually, I think it was 390 to 238 like you said, the 4 missed extra points, and they did also have 2 turnovers. So they threw two interceptions. Even though I think Temu has been a lot better than people thought, the kid out of Ole Miss, but I am still surprised just looking at them laying 10 here, because this was a team. Maybe they got mispriced. They probably did. But now you got a team that was the bottom of the barrel going into the season laying 10 points to New York. But that being said, I don't want any part of New York. I did not like what I saw out of Matt McGloin last week. I didn't think New York was that good in week 1 either. I just thought they actually played smart, fundamental football and let Tampa Bay make a bunch of mistakes and take advantage of them. So, I can't want any part of New York. I don't know if they're going to go with McGloin. I don't know if they're going to go with Marquise Williams. They eventually benched McGloin for Williams last week. So I don't know if I want to lay the 10, but I definitely don't want New York.
I think given McGloin's overall candor throughout that game, I mean, it probably winds up being Marquise Williams this week. And if it is, I kind of like the over 40.5 to a degree, because as you said, I think dual threat quarterbacks are very dangerous in this league because everyone's trying to figure everything out anyway. And the last thing you want to do is have to chase around somebody who can improvise on offense. So now you're going to have 2 mobile quarterbacks in this game. I think over 40.5, if Williams plays, is the look.
Yeah, because basically what you're wanting to do, even if you're not a great running team, you want to be a good enough running team to get that stuff in the third and manageable, where all of a sudden you are able to have a 3rd and 3 or 3rd and 4 or something like that, to where you can have short passes and just continue drives where these drives are not stalled out. So, absolutely. And I think that's what you're looking to do with these mobile quarterbacks. I mean, even a guy like Cardale Jones, who's 6'5", 260 or 270, he was able to run the ball last week and get him some early first downs early in that first quarter, which I thought really set the tone for the rest of the game.
That dude's a tank, man. And speaking of Cardale Jones here, we talk about him as the DC Defenders are an 8-point favorite on the road against the Los Angeles Wildcats. Total 44 here for this one. And, Cardale's played very, very well. The DC defense, I think, has been one of the biggest surprises here of XFL play so far. But now they're not facing Matt McGloin. They're not facing Brandon Silvers. Probably going to wind up facing Josh Johnson here, assuming he gets through this week and practice healthy. So a little bit of a step up in class here for the DC defense.
Yeah, it certainly is. And would lean a little bit with Los Angeles. And one of the things we were talking before the show about just kind of the general player, some observations we saw at the league. Arguably one of the funniest memes outside of the beer snake in DC at the Defenders game. Winston Moss, the head coach, he was the former assistant head coach under Mike McCarthy at Green Bay and, of course, a longtime NFL player. Winston Moss, who's the head coach and GM of LA, they showed him, he's sitting on the bench with his arms spread out, and he's the head coach of the league. And we just noticed that, and all the little memes were being sent out over Twitter over this. I just thought that was absolutely hilarious. Seeing that in that moment. LA did give up a lot, and we know that they fired their defensive coordinator, Pepper Johnson, in week 1. In terms of the stats, it didn't get any better. They looked a little bit better, but they also looked, when they got into that fourth quarter, that they tired out on defense. So you may have some guys that still aren't in shape and whatnot. So that's why I think one of the reasons you could see them getting bet against here. Plus, I think the DC Defenders right now, because they've been that first game, that early game on Saturday, where probably the most people are watching for the first 2 weeks. The DC Defenders are like the America's team of XFL. People like these guys. The fans have been into it. I've seen all over Twitter this is a DC Defenders fan account, and people actually putting their logo in their avatars and whatnot. So DC is definitely the team that I think people like, and they gravitate toward Cardale Jones. Familiar watching him at a high level at Ohio State for college football and stuff. So, I see why the Defenders are getting the money here. But if it goes up a little bit more, I would have to step in on LA.
Yeah, I like that approach. I think you're definitely onto something there. And I'm kind of thinking over maybe in this game too, because you've got two really good wide receiver groups here. Obviously, Nelson Spruce been the best wide receiver in the league so far for the Wildcats. Cardale spreads it around. He spread it around very well in week 2. Eli Rogers is probably the best overall wide receiver in this league, I would say. So I think you got two pretty decent skill position groups here, two good quarterbacks that have some experience. I think Johnson in his second game should be a little bit better. Maybe this is the week we finally get some scoring with this product.
Yeah, I think so too. And it's just kind of picking which one. I don't want to really bet all the overs across the board when all the unders are getting bet. But I think at least we go 2-2 to the over and maybe 3-1, because I think now they're being priced accordingly. And bettors are going to bet, like we always talk about in a variety of other sports throughout the year, recency bias. They're going to see all these games have gone to the under. They're going to continue to bet them accordingly. So you can either try to come back on the overs, or what's really been doing solid in XFL, solid business. I talked with Johnny Avello at DraftKings last night. They've been getting a lot of activity on the end game for these things, and a lot more than they admit that they anticipated. So that's what you're seeing. So you see this 0-0 first quarter, and then all of a sudden now they're over adjusting in terms of the end game. So you get a total at 45, let's say it's 0-0. Well, now all of a sudden it's like the low to mid 30s. And that's when you can jump in. And like, that's what I did with Dallas LA last week. I took the second half over. It was 19.5 because I think it was like 6-3 at the half. And then all of a sudden they ended up with 43 at the end of the game.
All right, so before we let Wes go here for this segment, let's talk some golf. WGC-Mexico Championship, Rory, DJ, Rahm, Thomas, the favorites here of a very, very good group of players. Once again, this is an event that's been around for 3 years now, I believe this is, with the Mexico Championship. There was another WGC event. It got switched over to Mexico. Very good field, $10.5 million purse. Who do you like this week?
Yeah, and Adam, we've talked golf futures a lot over the last couple of years, and you know that I usually don't like favorites in these type of events. I usually will always try to beat at least the odds-on market favorite, but I did use Rory McIlroy on the card this week at 7-1, and I guess why not? He's 30 under par his last 8 rounds here at Chapultepec down in Mexico. This is a course, by the way, that's played at altitude, 7,800 feet of elevation. So the yardage on the course is a little less than 7,400 yards, but it plays like about a 6,750 or a 6,800 yard course. You do not have to really use driver here. So you're going to see a lot of these guys use fairway metals, hybrids, 2 to 3 irons off the tee, because they don't have to necessarily use the big dog. They can keep it in the bag. So Rory is a guy, he's got 5 straight top 5s. He won the last WGC actually in China in the fall, and has played very well here. The only guy that's been better is Dustin Johnson. I skirted DJ a little bit because I saw him pulling wedge shots at Riviera, which is one of his best courses on the tour. And he's pulling wedge shots on a Sunday when he's somewhat in contention. So that gave me a little bit of a concern. And look, Rory fell back on Sunday. Had to birdie at the last just to get back into the top 5. But I do think that he fits this week. And there were a couple other guys I played as well. Tommy Fleetwood making his, even though it's not in the States, it's in Mexico, but his North American debut, shall we say, in 2020. But he's been active playing on the European Tour, had a runner-up in Abu Dhabi earlier this year, was runner-up at the ending DP Tour World Championship at Dubai last fall, and also won a couple weeks before at the Nedbank Golf Challenge in South Africa. So the game's in good form, and he's also off 3 weeks of rest. I think that'll suit him well. A couple guys that have good ball striking numbers here. Xander Schauffele, Hideki Matsuyama, I took them in the 20 to 25 range as well. Paul Casey, I got him as high as 50-1. Now seeing him in the market at about 33. So some people tipped him and got him at a good number. One thing you want to look at with this course is kind of a European style course. It's played at altitude. It's kind of like Kranz over in Switzerland where they play the Omega European Masters, or like a setup that you would see in Italy or Spain if you follow the European Tour, just the way it's laid out. So even though Europeans have not won the 3 events here in Mexico, it's been DJ twice and Mickelson sandwiched in between. European players have been all over the top 5 every single year here. So if you load up your card with some European guys like a Fleetwood, like Rory, Paul Casey, Bernd Wiesberger would be another good long shot to look at here. Sergio Garcia's played very solid here, 2 top 10s the last 2 years. Load up a little bit with Europeans, and I think you'll probably be rewarded.
Real quickly here, we have an alternate event as well, because we've got this WGC where it's pretty hard to qualify for that. So we have the alternate here out in Puerto Rico at Cocoa Beach. Anybody that you like here in this alternate tournament?
Yeah, I threw a few darts here, and that's basically what you do in this alternate event. I mean, people see Tony Finau, that he's a big name that's won this event. He was 50-1 the year he won it, so it wasn't like he was a short price. And I think people sometimes get scared because it's easier and I guess more safe to lay some of the shorter guys like Scott Brown, who's won here before, was second last week at Riviera, has some top 5s here as well outside of his wins. But, you know, at 20-1 in a wide open field like this, no thanks for me. A lot of triple-digit guys have won here. Of course, Martin Traynor last year at 125. I started in the middle range. I looked at Bo Hosler at 40-1, Peter Uihlein at 60-1. Peter Uihlein was a 54-hole leader at the Corn Ferry Tour event last week. So he's in at least solid form. Xinjun Zhang at 70-1, 4 top 25 finishes already in the 2019-2020 season. Won twice on the Corn Ferry last year. Tyler McCumber, 70-1, very good finishes and has an extensive background on the PGA Tour Latino America, and also had all top 10s in terms of the south of the United States events. Colombia, Panama, Bahamas, was a contender in all those on the KFT last year. Sebastian Kaplan, 90-1, Hank Lebioda, 125-1, and Sam Saunders, the grandson of Arnold Palmer, in on a sponsor exemption this week at 150. Those were just some darts that I threw this week for this one, and that's kind of what you have to do with this Puerto Rico Open, where there's no clear consensus favorite.
Love it. Wes Reynolds, whose work you can hear on VSIN. You can also see him in that Point Spread Weekly newsletter. Wes, when can people hear your work?
Yeah, we're all over the place, and the schedules have been switching a little bit because post Super Bowl, we have some of our talent that are going to take vacations and the like and have time off. But usually on the Green Zone on Monday and Tuesday nights from 6 to 10 Pacific. Also, we'll be back over the weekend on Sunday from 3 to 7 Pacific on that program. We have our golf show Long Shots on Tuesday nights, 5 Pacific, 8 Eastern for an hour on Tuesdays. And then I'll be doing the Saturday XFL Betcast, which you can go to vsin.com and get more details on that.
Well, make sure you follow Wes on Twitter as well, at Wes Reynolds and the number 1. Wes, we appreciate your time as always, man. Thank you so much for joining me here, and we'll talk to you again next Wednesday.
All right, Adam, you got it, pal.